Hey, I'm straight up off the block, hopped in the phone and pushed the top back. I've been hustling for a long time and I can't stop that. Big like I'm that, best believe it, and them all back. Yeah, I be ballin' all the time, I'm point guard and a quarterback.
Hey, welcome to another Sports and Culture interview. This is going to be a special one because I have a good friend, Chris, here with me today. As always, all of our interviews are brought to you by the Carolina Law Group. Make sure you go get your free consultation today at the website below. Also, the Carolina Law Group would like to let you know they serve justice with integrity. Again, that's the Carolina Law Group. Follow them at www.thecarolinalawgroup.com. And also feel free to chat with us at any particular time on the Hagler's Transport Service chat room. Today we have, I feel like, one of the true leaders invested in the youth. Force Indy race teams, Reid. Mr. Reid, you said call you Reid.
Call me Reid.
Reid, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
So as I mentioned before, it's going to be a little different since we're going to be tag teaming with Chris, who is over my racing division. There's no way I can do a racing interview without having Chris on. So this will be fun. I want to kind of start everything off. I like to start at the very beginning. Most kids, they grow up interested in the sport that they kind of see on a daily basis in the neighborhood. What was it about motorsports that drew you to the sport?
Hey, well, Tyler, that's a great question because I grew up on the East Coast and my family moved to Indianapolis when I was in middle school, and I didn't know anything about racing. And I came to here, and this was a huge motorsports city, and as they call it, the racing capital of the world. So I heard about the Indy 500 on the radio, and just the sound of the cars, the excitement that was in the community just gave me this interest to find out a little bit more about it. So we used to listen to the race on the radio. And when I was 17, I got a chance to go to my first race and I was hooked. I mean, just the speed, the engines, the tires, the smell of the fuel, all of that. It's a full experiential kind of thing. And I was hooked. But I also think it just from the idea of being a young man, and like a lot of us, we like cars. And that was the draw for me. I love cars. And then when I got into seeing performance vehicles, I was hooked.
Absolutely. And Chris, kind of to go with you, of course, you're the one who set this up, man. What was it about Reid that felt like this was going to be a must-have to have on our interview today?
I'm going to say this with the absolute most respect possible. Ernie Francis Jr. stuck out to me. And Rod, that's going to take me a minute.
Oh, please, man.
Official, Rod, he's a driver that I follow for SRX, and he's somebody that I learned a lot about last year. So when I had learned that he was on your team, he's your driver, I instantly started looking at the factors. Who's the owner? How long's the team been in business? And you popped out. And then I started reading on the history of Reid, your entire team, Force Indy. And then along the way, Tracy Royal, who is the other person that's not here that was a big deal in this, she actually educated me a little bit on your team when I called her. She said, well, look, this is the first minority-owned team. And instantly I was like, my editor is huge into firsts of any kind of sports, but especially when it is a minority-driven thing. So when that popped up, I mean, the light bulb literally went from dim to I can't even see through the hallway. And instantly I knew I had to find a way to make this work. And I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a bittersweet thing. I started racing when I was in my 20s, and that's quite a few years ago. And I was involved in open wheel racing, Super V, Formula Atlantic, primarily on the West Coast. And when we had some challenges in doing that, I realized very quickly that not only was it going to be difficult to maintain any kind of presence in the sport, it was the obvious stuff. I mean, Chris, you know this, racing as a whole, and especially open wheel racing, it's probably 90, and I'm being conservative, 90% Caucasian, both from an ownership perspective, from a participation perspective, vendors, suppliers, manufacturers, et cetera. So it's more than a notion to want to get involved in it, and then to be able to sustain yourself and say, I want to be with these other guys that have a lot of years, a lot of money, a lot of influence, and they look at me like, who is this guy? But I think the key, you talked about Ernie. When we got started, I knew about Ernie several years ago when he was running Trans Am, and there aren't that many drivers of color, period, let alone that are active today. And I'm glad to say that I know all of them. I mean, from the kids that are 15 years old up, it's not as many as you would think. It's less than a dozen that are active. Everything from go-karts to what we're doing with Indy Lights, and just to be aware of them, to be able to participate with them and understand what they're doing is a great thing. But I started wanting to be able to give an opportunity and say, if there are things that we can do to help you in your career, then we'll do it. With Ernie, he's a 7-time Trans Am champ. I don't know if you knew that, but when he got into SRX, that's what really put him on the map, because he ended up beating Tony Stewart in oval track race here in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Raceway Park. And all of a sudden, it was just buzzing everywhere. So I thought not so much that, he was popular, but it was the fact that he could sustain himself and handle himself with, quote unquote, the big boys. And so knowing that we were going to try to move up the ladder and get into IndyCar racing, it was a natural to think about him being in that position and ready to make that step through the ladder system like we're doing into Indy Lights.
Chris, you can go ahead.
Yeah, and that's kind of answers one of my questions. I'm sure that Ernie was your number one pick for a driver. I didn't have a doubt there, but was there another driver that made the list that was also of a minority, that was close, maybe a close second?
Yeah. So we started a year and a half ago with this venture that is now Force Indy. And my first driver was a young man named Miles Rowe. And Miles, I had become aware of when he was 14. He was a go-kart driver. And he went on to the Lucas Oil Raceway racing school. And he was a standout. And he was like most drivers, and then especially when you add in most drivers of color, we don't have a lot of money. So to go to those next steps that cost a lot, I looked at Miles and I said, I'm going to try to give this young man a chance. And so we did that with the USF 2000 team that we ran in 2021, and we won a race. So right now, Miles Rowe and Force Indy has the distinction of being the only winning driver and team in an IndyCar sanctioned event in history. And that was August 29th last year. So Miles was definitely, to answer your question, that he was definitely the kind of kid that I thought had what it takes. The challenge is each step you go up the ladder. And let me just add, for those listeners that aren't aware of open wheel and the ladder system that's IndyCar, think of it like baseball. We've got single A, double A, triple A, and then the majors. It's the exact same thing. We have what's called USF 2000, Indy Pro 2000, Indy Lights, and then IndyCar, which is the top level. So it actually is a pretty straight thread in terms of growth. And at each level, you're increasing in performance of the car, speed of the car, and all of the sophistication of putting those cars together on the track. So we didn't think that Miles could quickly get ready to jump 2 rungs, if you will, on that ladder. And he's still racing right now. In fact, he should be a barber as well in another full season of USF 2000. But we thought Ernie had the ability to step in just because he had been driving a car that had actually more horsepower than we got in the Indy Lights car. But the Indy Lights car literally is probably 1,500 pounds lighter than a Trans Am. So we can top in at 210, where the Trans Am is going to top in around 180. So, we definitely think that there are other drivers that come up. Miles Rowe is one. There are a couple other ones that are running in some lower classes that we're watching, including a young lady that's 15 years old, and I'm trying to help her with her entree into transitioning from karts to cars.
Now, I read you kind of started off in sponsorships, like, which is kind of an area where a lot of new entrepreneurs like myself struggle in. Like, what type of advice can you share for someone that's looking to land a sponsor?
This is a real tough area because think of it. It doesn't matter if it's motorsports or if we were selling, soft drinks. You've got to be able to understand the marketplace, be able to know what to say, when to say it, and to whom to say it. So that's just good marketing. With motorsports, you've got an added component, and that is we are not what I consider mainstream, especially in the African American community. So therefore, to convince any kind of a sponsor that you should sponsor us because we've got a presence in the Black community, they start looking around going, well, there's not that many Blacks going to races. Why should I support that? And my thing is, well, you know what? Do you not go after an Asian market because they aren't particularly going to races? And I know, Chris, you're probably familiar with, maybe you too, Tyler, you're familiar with drifting.
Yeah.
Formula Drift is hot, hot, hot. And there are a lot of the Asian companies, you're talking about, Honda, Mazda, Toyota, and those kind of cars are in there. So it's not because they had a strong Asian market, it's because those companies were Japanese companies. And therefore, you've got a lot of, Asian kids and young men and women that are doing Formula Drift and learning about it. And I think the same thing can happen here if we say, let's take some of those dollars and target the African American market. Earlier, Chris, you mentioned IMSA, and I don't know if your listeners know much about Le Mans type racing and endurance racing, but Cadillac is pretty dominant. Say it so is Acura, but historically African Americans bought a lot of Cadillacs. Yeah. Well, we can see how that Cadillac is performing on the track. And we can start thinking, hey, maybe I'll go out and get me another Escalade, or maybe I'll go and buy, whatever performance car is out there. And so I think, Tyler, really a lot of this is being able to understand the marketplace and go right back to, those potential sponsors and try to make it an economic and marketing sense. The emotional piece, it sounds good, and a lot of folks will think that that's what sells it. But at the end of the day, you got to say, this makes economic sense, because this is the bottom line. They want to sell cars, they want to sell soft drink, whatever it is. And, we buy a lot of product, we buy a lot of cars. So if I can show that sponsor this makes sense for them, then usually we get the sponsor dollars.
Absolutely. And I know, kind of just to stay on the subject of what we were talking about, there's not a lot of African Americans in this business, unfortunately. And you were one of the first. Can you talk about some of the obstacles you had to overcome just coming up inside the business?
Yeah. The first and obvious one is that, when you walk into the boardroom, the locker room, whatever it is, for motorsports, the pit, in the paddock, it's immediate that someone looks at you and start to question. You can see it on their face. Well, why is he here? Is he someone's friend? Or they never see me until lately. They don't see me as an owner or someone who is involved in the sport from both a support perspective as well as a team perspective. So that's the first one, just to get past the, oh, I thought you were the, and I'm not trying to be, negative, but, I thought you were just the janitor, the guy that, come in and hang out and you're dealing with operations in the building. They don't think of me initially as being a part of a team. So I think that was first. The other part that happens, unfortunately, is that they assume that I don't know much about racing and motorsports. So since you don't see many of us there, and I actually had a couple people ask me, especially since I hired right off the bat, I hired 3 African Americans to be on my team: mechanic, engineer, doing other kind of support services. And they were going like, well, one kid is 6'4". Why isn't he playing basketball? And I wanted to tell him he's never played basketball and he's a heck of a racer and drifter. So they take it for granted. So that's another obstacle, that there's a perception that we don't know anything about it. Or I would say it a different way, that we're not interested in the sport. And I'll come back and tell them, and I know my history, and I always try to impart that on our young people, that we've been involved in around cars and motorsports since the very, very beginning. And so when Henry Ford or the Dodge brothers or the Chevrolet brothers were building cars, we were right there, probably sweeping the shop where they were building it, and have always been involved. So we have race car drivers. I'll give you a little bit of trivia, and Chris, this may stump you on. I may stump you on this one. Jack Johnson, the boxer.
Yes, sir.
Okay, the great Jack Johnson. All right, he raced, and I believe it was in like 1910. He bought a high performance car and challenged one of the drivers who at that time was racing in the 500 to a race. And that happened in Coney Island. Look it up. And it was, I think it was somewhere around 1910. So
I feel like I've heard about this.
Yeah. And people are citing because you think Jack Johnson, he's a boxer.
Yeah.
Well, he bought I think it was called the Marmon race car or something like that. And yeah, he challenged him to a race. Of course, he didn't. He wasn't a racer, but he was competitive. And so we've been in and around racing in cars for a long time.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I mean, for me, I specialize. My area is mostly NASCAR, but I follow racing of all kinds. IMSA is a great platform for a lot of drivers that are, they're trying to get into more of the car version of racing. There's a lot of diversity there. I just think it's unfortunate, not just racing, sports in general, politics, the world, that we're in 2022. And if an African American person does something for the first time, it's news. Like, how are we in 2022 and this is just happening? And I think it's unfortunate because 40 years ago, we could have been where we are now had we been more like Reid, more like Tyler Butler, guys that push through. They don't care about the obstacles that might be in their way. They want what they want. They want the success that they can earn. They're not standing there for a handout. And those kind of people are hard to find. And so, I admire Tyler, and I've told him this a bunch. He's a pioneer to me because he gave me a chance. I have no degree whatsoever in any kind of anything to do with media. And he gave me a chance to write for him out of nowhere. And I can't thank him enough for that. And Rod, you're in a situation where you're paving streets for 30, 40 years from now for not just owners of teams, but commissioners of racing leagues in general. Roger Penske level type of stuff. And hopefully it's not 30 years. That's a number. Hopefully it's much sooner. But, without y'all's work, we may still be standing in the same place. And
You mentioned 30 years, and it was last year was the 30th anniversary of Willie T. Ribbs's, first qualification for the Indy 500.
right.
And I talked to Willie often, and in fact, I talked to him yesterday, and some of the things that he's doing, and still connected to the sport. But it's sad because Willie, not sad that he came to the 500. It's sad that it's been 30 years since he first came, and there's only been one other African American to do it, and that was George Mack in 2003. That's it. So we're almost coming up on another 20 years of having an African American at the pinnacle of motorsports when it happened 30 years ago. So I appreciate what you just said, Chris, that I don't want it to be 30 years. I don't want it to be 3 years. If we can get Ernie and Miles Rowe and Violet Townsend and others that I know that are really chomping at the bit to want to stay in the sport. And I look over and I know you're a NASCAR guy, and I look at what Michael Jordan's, doing and others, it just is mind-boggling to me that we're still pioneering, like you just said, at this point when we really should be kind of mainstream. If you look down the paddock at NASCAR, and I was there when they came here, I looked down pit row in the paddock, and I start seeing a lot of black faces. And I went on and talked to some of the guys. But it's interesting. Most of them came out of sports like football or other kinds of physical sports. And what are they doing? Tire changing.
Pit crew, yeah.
Pit crew. Where are those engineers? Because we got some smart people out there, men and women that have color. Where are the other kinds of team owners? So I'm hoping that MJ and others will say, you know what, we need people all the way up and down. And that's what I'm doing, trying to make sure that when I step out there, because right now we are the only ones in open wheel racing. And it's sad. It is sad. There are a couple of young men that I talked to, a couple of my fraternity brothers that are both in NASCAR and a couple at Arrow McLaren right now. And we're having those discussions, man, about getting the shot, about getting the chance. And he said for the most part, we're still being seen. And Tyler, this kind of goes with the question you asked me. That perception is that we're the physical guys. Mm-hmm. We can throw a football, we can tackle, but can we think about how our car is put together? Oh, wait a minute, that's too high level. But I think we're getting there. I really do.
And let's transition over to NXG. Can you, just for those that may not be familiar with the company, can you explain what your program is about and what moved you to start such a program?
Oh, thank you for that question. So NXG Youth Motorsports, the NXG stands for Next Gen Racers. It was born in 2000, and it was for the next generation, in my mind, of race car drivers and people in racing. And we had a lot of frustration. You asked me earlier about, why we got into sports, some of the challenges we had. Well, quite frankly, in the late 80s and early 90s, I was involved and had quite a bit of money brought to, at that time, a team that was led by, a white guy. And we got, frankly, ripped off. I mean, I was too young to know better. And I lost a lot of money and didn't get this opportunity that we were wanting to have. And that is to test IndyCar so that the guy that I was working with, my partner for a long time in business, a guy named Charles Wilson, we were trying to get in to run IndyCar. We would have run in 1988. So we would have predated Willie T. Ribbs by 3 years had this deal gone through. But I was so upset, and he was too, that I literally stayed out of racing for almost 10 years. Something that I loved. In fact, I ended up going to Formula One, watching Formula One, doing some IMSA, getting involved in IMSA. But I was pretty much done with open wheel racing on the American side. And one day we were at a go-kart track and said, why aren't there more little black boys and girls at this go-kart track? And it says, because there's nobody. There are no mentors. There's no one to say, hey, this could be fun. This could be something you could do. And at that time, we sat there and said, you know what? We can't let this happen to the next generation. And so we created NXG Youth Motorsports in 2000. Took us 6 years to raise the money. And the sole objective was to introduce young men and women to motorsports. And we did it by offering go-kart racing classes. We bought all the equipment. We provided everything so that these young people come, and all they had to do, and this I kind of tease and say, you just have a good attitude and clean underwear, because we put them in a uniform and want to make sure that they could drive. So we started officially in 2006, and to date, here we are 16 years later, and I'm very, very proud to say I've worked with over 2,300 kids.
Wow.
And in that period of time, predominantly here in central Indiana, and over 92% of those kids are Black. So it's been and about 26% female. We are now going into Detroit, but the approach is that we use karting and racing as a life skill and a STEM education tool. And it's actually phenomenal. We had a class this past weekend, the coldest class we ever had here in Indianapolis. It was 39 degrees outside with kids freezing in these little go-karts. But and we're going to Detroit in another week. But that was the what actually caught the attention of the folks at the Speedway. Roger Penske, you probably read about that. He called me and said, "Hey, I understand that you got this program with kids. Why aren't you doing, why aren't you racing? Why aren't you doing more?" And I had to give all of those folks an education and say, you got little Black boys and girls that live within within a 2-mile radius of the track that have never been in here because they've never been invited. So my program does exactly that. And I'm just, that gets me so excited, because those young people are going to be our future that Chris, you talked about. So if I can get them to think about the entire realm of motorsports, careers, things that they may want to do in life beyond just race car drivers, it's going to be 1/10 of 1% of these kids might be a race car driver. But you know what? There are kids that can go into IT or healthcare. And, because people don't think about that with motorsports. We have a huge, when you think about it, you can't have a race without having, first responders there. Right. So I just get them to think about it and say, you can do this. And I'll just one final thing, Tyler. A race car driver, for the most part, is paying to play. It's a pay to play sport. If you can get involved in some of these other careers, front end ticket office, marketing, etc., in motorsports, they pay you.
Mm-hmm. Chris, you got anything?
I have a go-to driver. I know you know him, Bill Lester.
I know Bill real well.
We interviewed him last year.
We did.
I still talk to him at least once a week. He's my go-to if there's anything history-wise. I've been reading his book, Winning in Reverse. He talks a lot about Willie T. Ribbs and his relationship that he had with him for a little while. I have this saying that has nothing to do with sports, but I rely on it. It's no taxation without representation. And a lot of people see that as just a political statement, but it applies to everything in your life, and racing too. It's a saying that's basically, if you want me to give you something, we need you to give us something. And in racing, that is what it's all about. These teams go to these tracks each weekend, and they don't know. A lot of them are volunteer teams. I mean, that's a good chunk of these guys are volunteers trying to get somewhere. And so to hear that you're giving kids an opportunity to race, knowing that, like you said, 10% might be drivers, maybe less, but giving them that opportunity is the representation. That to me, it means a lot, because there's kids every day that do not get an opportunity like that. They don't get anything. They go to bed hungry. They go to school without a parent making sure they're dressed correctly for the day. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in everyday lives that persuade you from doing anything you really want to do. So it makes me very happy to see that you're doing something, and not just for anyone, but for everyone that wants to give it a shot. That really hits it home for me, because racing is always a soft spot for me, and I'm sure it's you. One thing I wanted to ask you, and it was kind of answered, is when and where were you when you really just fell in love with racing?
Yeah, I harken back to that time that I told you about when I was 17 and I was at the Speedway, and that was intriguing to me. But I think it was the first time that I actually had a chance to and I was in Detroit. It was a Trans Am race. They were also was Formula One, and I saw Ayrton Senna, and
Oh
he was
man.
running
Mm.
through the streets of Detroit, and he actually hit a tire barricade literally about 50 feet from where I was peeping through the fence. And the cars were so sophisticated. And of course, Tyler, if you don't know about him, but he's probably, arguably maybe one of the greatest race car drivers ever lived. But
Oh yeah.
he was killed in a car, Brazilian, and what he did to bring Brazil to motorsports. I always think about that. But I think it was that time period that motorsports became just this one thing that I just had to be a part of. And so that's why when that happened to us in '88, I was devastated. I mean, I had blinders on. I just assumed we just work hard. Your parents teach you that: work hard, have a good work ethic, raise some money, and you will achieve. And that happened to us, and we got ripped off. So I don't blame anyone. It was probably one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned in my life. But I think it was that period, in the '80s, when it just hit me that this is really cool. And now, I mean, when I go out, and I hope both of you guys, if you get a chance to see us, because our races are televised. Um, those are some cool cars, man. The Indy
Mhm.
car, they're
Yeah.
fast, they're sophisticated, and it's some really, really good, wheel to wheel racing. Very different than NASCAR, but I'm excited. So I still get kind of chills, and when we get ready to go out, I was like, oh, check this out. But obviously, I'm thinking of other things. Make sure you bring it home. Like I told Ernie in our first race at St. Pete, I said, man, those walls have a way of biting you, and he did. He did really, really well. Even though we were struggling a little bit on the mechanical side, um, we started last, dead last, and we finished seventh. So I was really, really proud of him and what the team did.
And
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No, go ahead and go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first, I wanted to apologize for going a little bit over on time. It's just been a real good conversation. So I'm gonna try to wrap it up with these final two questions. I'm a real big person on acronyms, and I know one of your acronyms is CART. Can you elaborate what that means?
Man, thank you for that, man. That's just so cool that you even knew that.
Hey,
Yeah,
man, I
we
do my
use that in the
research.
NX. We use that in the NXG Youth Motorsports, and CART stands for knowledge. The A stands for awareness. The R stands for respect, and the T stands for thinking. And for us, that's what I hope to impart on these young people. That it doesn't matter what you do. It can be racing, it can be basketball, it can be mathematics. If you have the knowledge and you're aware of everything around you, you respect others, and you really, really think about what you're doing, chances are you're going to be pretty successful. So that's how we spell kart. Everybody says karting is racing, but I like to spell it with the K-A-R-T. So thanks for asking about that.
No problem. And before I ask my final question, I'm gonna kick it over to you, Chris. You got anything?
I'm glad you mentioned Ernie Francis Jr. finishing seventh. I was going to bring that up, but I noticed that no pit stops. Is that something I'm still learning the light division myself? I've watched a lot of IndyCar, but do they not do pit stops in Indy Lights?
Yeah, no, they don't. And I tell you, it's if you look at racing overall, depending on the series and what the particulars are, just like with Formula One, they stopped refueling several years ago because of the danger. Indy Lights, F3, all the way down the line, they look at it as a spec series, meaning that technically speaking, all the cars are quote unquote equal, using
Right.
the same motors, the same engines, same tire compounds, etc. So what they do is they say, go out, do the best you can within a certain period of time, and our races are about 45 minutes. So it's however many laps you can get, or 45 minutes, but no refueling or tires, and that helps keep the cost down. But it also is a safety factor. So IndyCar is at the top is where they are both changing tires and refueling because they're going a lot farther.
I gotcha. It was just interesting to me. I'd noticed that nobody made a pit stop, and I was like, man, that's a little different to me. I'm used to the strategy portion coming in a race where you make adjustments, you pit at certain times to gain advantages on the track, and there was none of that. So for Ernie to go from 14th to 7th without strategy, just straight driving skill, it's got to make you happy.
Yeah. Yeah, the strategy is a little different, and I will tell you that and suggest that there is strategy. It's mainly tire management because your tire degradation is going. I mean, immediately after about 3 to 5 laps, tires aren't going to get any better. They absolutely just going to go down. So you got to manage that. The other thing, so you having all this tire wear while you're still, on the track and actually doing more to the car. I mean, you're getting lighter and lighter and fuel, but that's the number one strategy. And then the second piece of that is your setup, being able to figure out the right setup and the right gear ratios to handle that 45 minutes or however many laps that race is. The idea here is that it's much more driving and driver talent than it is maybe mechanical talent like you might find in F1 or even a higher level of IndyCar. So yeah, you'll have to watch it. It gives you a really good idea of how some of these young drivers, these young guns are doing and what kind of ability that they have.
Is there a big difference between the G's you guys get through the turns versus some of the other series? It seems like y'all carry a lot more G's through the turns.
Yeah, we'll pull depending on what it is, maybe 3, 4 Gs, especially on an oval versus IndyCar. They were at Texas Motor Speedway, and they said they were pulling like 5, 6 Gs going into the corner. So yeah, I mean, there's no joke when you're talking about driving 180, 190 miles an hour, and then you going into a turn, or a hairpin. It's pretty tough. It was kind of funny because Ernie, when he got finished, and he's been driving all these Trans Am cars, and
Yeah.
he goes, man, I'm sore because we don't have any power steering either.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's something. Well, that takes me out of it. I'm not racing it. You can have it, man.
And final question here. I know here over at Sports and Culture, we do a lot. We're working with kids from middle school to high school, just following them, and our main goal is kind of to give them a platform, especially for the smaller schools that doesn't receive as much attention. One thing I love about it the most is just seeing how the confident in the kids grow from their freshman year all the way up to their senior year. With your program, like focusing on education and skill wise, like what is that feeling like for you when you see the growth of a kid from the time they started your program to the time they finish?
Oh, Tyler, it's the greatest thrill in the world. It's what I really, it's the reason I get up. I can watch a race car and I get thrilled about that. But when I see a young person, they kind of get that, and you've experienced it, where they all of a sudden looks like the light bulb comes on. You've been working with them for a little while, and then all of a sudden they seem like they get it. That's the same thing for us. I mean, we will work with our youngest are going to be 10 and a half to 11 years old. We require fifth grade math and science proficiency. So when they come to us, they're pretty young, and then I'll get parents to tell me, "Wow, he's a lot more confident," or "I didn't know she would ever even try this." Especially some of our little sisters,
Right.
the little divas, and I got them pulling their braids together to put in that helmet, and they're trying something that they've never done before. Most of my kids, literally about 80% of them, have never been in anything motorized. So I pride ourselves on taking them from literally 0 to 40 miles an hour, which is the fastest these carts go, with poise, with an understanding of what what it requires to have cart control. And when you see them drive, when you see them take their test and they come back and they say, "Hey, Coach Reid, I had a great time. Thank you." Or "I learned so much this week." It's so heartwarming. And I know, Tyler, that is to you too with what you do. I don't think there's anything greater and than helping a young person kind of find themselves and realize that there are things that they can do. And I didn't know that. I shared with you, my mom was 40 years a teacher, and she taught first and second graders. And I used to, when we were growing up, I was like, "Oh, my mom's babysitting, with all these little kids." And one day when I was, started this program, mentoring and teaching kids, it hit me how thrilling and how rewarding it was to be able to kind of see those wheels turning in their head and you're influencing that young mind. And like I do now, especially for our young African American boys, I just want to make sure that they stay out of the system, that they don't, have go down a negative path. Because I work predominantly with kids from underserved communities. So if I can do something to maybe change their path a little bit, or at least reinforce the path that others have them on that's positive, man, I'm the I feel truly blessed to be able to do that.
Man, again, thank you so much for this opportunity. You picked up a huge fan in me. I'm definitely
Thanks,
going to
man.
be following for here on out. Chris, I wanted to thank you again just for jumping on with me today and also setting up this opportunity to speak with Rod today. Again, everybody who's tuning in, all of our interviews are brought to you by the Carolina Law Group. Make sure you get your free consultation today by going to www.thecarolinalawgroup.com, which also is viewed at the bottom of the chat. Again, Rod, I almost called you Mister. thank you.
Sorry, my man.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much for
Tyler.
joining us.
Hey, man. Thank you both, Chris. Hope that maybe I'll see you guys out there, but don't hesitate. I'm right here.
I got a lawn chair. Save me a seat at Barber.
All
I'm
right.
coming.
Phone call away.
All right. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you.